Nicki Minaj would not have the career she has without queer people. Queer people are the reason why Nicki Minaj is so successful. Sydney Sweeney has great genes. Whiteness has contributed to James Charles's survival. Hi everyone, how you doing? Hope you're well, safe, hydrated, well rested, and everything in between. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Jord. This is the Winning Side podcast, and for those of you who do know me, hey, what are you saying? Did you miss me? My head looks really shiny. Guys, these lights are doing bits. I'm really excited today. Wanted to do this for a while, but I feel like these conversations require a lot of research, and that's what I've been doing for the past few weeks. So I want to have a conversation on cancel culture and white privilege. I guess the question really is, does white privilege stop cancel culture? So cancel culture is very subjective. There's a big spectrum, right? Cancel culture is basically the idea of when a celebrity or someone in power or influence has behaved in a certain way or done something which then leads to them potentially having disadvantages or consequences within their career. You know, sometimes this is, you can debate whether or not it actually does work. Sometimes this is permanent. Sometimes this is temporarily. I think it's on a very individual basis. Like, obviously we have cases where, like, some people, I don't know if it's even fair to put them in a cancel culture capacity, because I think it should just be like they're just done. Like, you know, like obviously R. Kelly, P. Diddy, you know, them type. But I don't know if that's really the same, because they just deserve to not have career. They don't have careers. But yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about my thoughts. I'm going to use some examples for people who I think have avoided cancel culture because of white privilege, and then do a comparison with some people who aren't white, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so like I really wanted to make this current. And I also wanted to involve people that really do come to mind when you think of cancel culture. And I think if I look back, either in January or February 2026, to be confirmed which one. But when I think back to 2025 and I think of who comes to mind when I think of cancel culture, the first person who comes to mind is Sydney Sweeney. So Sydney Sweeney is obviously a very popular actress. She has probably become one of the most in-demand actresses in the last couple of years. And you know what though? No matter what I think on someone, even though I don't know these people, no matter what my thoughts are on a particular person, I really appreciate and acknowledge a hustler. I really acknowledge and appreciate someone who works a lot, does a lot of art. And Sydney Sweeney, she is booked and busy. Like, do you know what I mean? You can't fault that. She's been acting since the age of 12. In minor television roles and appearances and yada yada, but she really came to prominence in 2019 when she got the role as Cassie Howard in Euphoria. And I think at this point there wasn't really much opinion or discourse on Sydney Sweeney. I don't think we really had that. I think we just saw her as the blonde girl in Euphoria. And you know what? Creds where due. I love her in Euphoria. I think she's very, very good at playing Cassie. Cassie's broken, isn't she? She's got daddy issues and all these other complications, yada yada. I'm very excited to see how season 3 lands. And yeah, I think she does the role justice. So I'm excited. But yeah, like I said, she's been booked and busy for, how long has it been since the last Euphoria? Was it 2022, 2021? Okay, 2022. So it will be 4 years when it comes out in April. But yeah, okay. So not so much now, but she has previously shown support for LGBTQ plus rights, BML, women's rights, but she does tend to avoid these topics. And do you know what? In a way, I feel two ways about it, because in a way I feel like if you don't have the knowledge, hush. But I do feel like when you are a celebrity that has that much power and that much influence, I feel like you really should be doing the most to try and make things better for the people that have built your career. But yeah, and I think the first thing that comes to mind, right, or the first a bit of attention where people clocked on to her being a bit controversial was the situation with her mum's birthday. So in August 2022, Sydney Sweeney celebrated her mum's birthday. It was like a very cowboy attire, like theme vibe type of thing. And like in pictures, like shared, like wherever on socials, online, one person can actually be seen wearing a t-shirt with an American flag and a blue line, which is associated with the anti-BML movement, right? Basically like showing support to the police, which is obviously like just a complete no-go, you know. And like bear in mind, you have to think Sydney Sweeney like works with a lot, when you watch her stuff, she works with a lot of people of color, so it just didn't really land. And then you have other people who have like hats in the red MAGA style, right, that say make 60 great again. Obviously this is associated with like Donald Trump having the caps and the attire saying make America great again. And I think the controversy came into place where people were basically saying how she has become or is too comfortable with family members backing Donald Trump, right? And then I think it was left for a while until Sydney like came out and basically said people made too many assumptions about what was going on, and the people that brought the stuff were Sydney's mum's friends. And I think fair enough, but I think the association is still a bit of a red flag. I feel hit and miss with this situation. One, because it wasn't actually her that did or said anything, and two, because you just don't really know, do you? Like she could just be saying that, but I just feel like if that was me hypothetically, right, and my mum had friends like that, I would not be inviting them into my home. Even if my mum had a party, they wouldn't be contacted by me personally. But obviously, we all think it somewhat differently. So I think with that one, you can really see it either side, you know. But I think the big one that has really obviously effed things over, well, not even that much really, but you'd think it would F up the average person, was the campaign with American Eagle Outfitters. Obviously, she does this jean advert, this campaign, and at the end, the dialogue goes, Sydney Sweeney has great jeans, which is controversial, obviously. I think people claimed like the association between jeans and jeans was associated with like blonde hair, blue eyes, white women promoting white supremacy and eugenics. And supposedly, apparently, the criticism received from this led to bad box office reception for the film Christie, and for also the film that she filmed a few years before but got released relatively recently, which was Americana. And I think, do you know what? This wasn't good. This wasn't great. At this point, I'm still thinking to myself, we don't know how much creative control she gets. This could have been her team. We actually don't know. Like we genuinely do not know. But I think what made the matters even worse was the GQ interview. And fair play to the interviewer, because they were very like fair-sided. And I thought, you know what, fair, respect. And basically like the interviewer said, I'm giving you an opportunity now. Do you want to say anything? To which Sydney says, when I have an issue that I want to speak about, people will hear. And I thought, that really isn't the most appropriate way to go about it. I think it's the lack of accountability, right, and the acknowledgement. Like, she claims the ad spoke for itself. And I just think, like, take accountability, even to be like, but the thing is, even to be like, I didn't have creative control. However, looking back, I am so sorry if I offended someone. I am so sorry if this like rubbed people up the wrong way. I do know we are in a period of time where everyone is very critical, right? But I think also when power dynamics and white supremacy are so prominent and so ongoing, I do appreciate why like people, particularly black women, feel a certain type of way. You know, because a black woman would not be able to do that campaign in the same way and not receive even more backlash. But obviously, like, this hasn't really affected her career. You know, I went to go see The Housemaid on Monday because I love Amanda Seyfried. Calm down. And she was phenomenal in that. The box office was really, really good. But, you know, the outcome, there's no lasting career damage. You know, she continues to have brand deals and leading roles. She continues to be a positive frame in the media. And it kind of like asks you the question, how and why did she survive? Well, she's young, she's white, she's conventionally attractive, you know, she's framed as apolitical, and she's deemed as unaware rather than malicious, you know. I think, but like, how long can we leave the idea and the mindset and the narrative of being uneducated as an excuse? She has the resources and the facilities and the team to educate her to an extremely high standard, a standard which a lot of people will never be able to be accustomed to, you know? I think also like white women in pop culture are granted plausible accountability, you know? Like they're given the allowance and the proximity to have their controversy misunderstood or softened by like innocent narratives, you know? Sydney Sweeney is a perfect example of how white privilege prevents cancel culture, you know, like the way that she is able to lack accountability and to acknowledge her wrongs and still have probably one of the most exciting careers for any actress of this century in the last like few years is a very rare case, you know. Her genes are a contribution to her success, and she is talented, but I don't think the same reception would be given to a woman who's black or a woman of color, you know? That's just my take. So, okay, the next person we'll talk about is a really interesting character. And again, even if I don't particularly like someone, I appreciate and acknowledge what they have achieved, you know? So the next person I want to talk about is James Charles. James Charles obviously is a YouTuber, a very prominent, a very famous YouTuber and a makeup artist. He came to extreme level of fame in 2016 when he went viral for his makeup. And then he also became the first male brand ambassador for CoverGirl. And again, I think what James Charles has done for the makeup industry is unbelievable. Like, I don't think there'll ever be another makeup artist, content creator as a man who will have that much influence. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong, you know? So I really do appreciate that space that he's created, but he's just so controversial. So controversial. And I think also, like, the things that he tends to be guilty of are things that just shouldn't happen more than once. Do you know what I mean? He's been known to be quite possessive and demanding from straight men that he fancies, and also the unfortunate situations he's had with men who are underage. I think when I think of the first controversy which comes to mind with James Charles is the situation between YouTuber and makeup artist Tati Westbrook. Now, I've never actively watched James because like I just don't like. There's no reason. I think he's great. I love what he does. I think he's great at I think he's amazing what he does. It just isn't my type of content. However, the Tati Westbrook drama, that was just so tea. Obviously, like, so this initiated from where like James was working with a brand for Coachella, right? Who was actively a competitor to Tati's business, which is a bad move because Tati obviously was James's mentor as he was like getting into the industry, you know, so that's a bit of a kick in the face. But obviously that really isn't enough for cancel culture from an audience perspective, but I'm just building it up. But I think also when this all came out, Tati did like a very long video, which has been removed now, but some re-uploaded it. So I got to watch it the other day, thank you, about how he will attempt to seduce straight men. And bear in mind, not straight men who are straight, who he just seems to like, right? This was also backed up by Zara Larsson, who was dating someone at the time that James apparently had an eye for, and also Jeffree Star. But Jeffree Star is a bit controversial in himself, so I feel like I'm going to leave that one there. You know, but when this all unraveled, he was the first YouTuber in the shortest space of time to lose 1 million subscribers, you know? So pretty severe stuff, you'd like to think so. And then obviously he was able to rebuild the brand. Things were amended. A couple of years later, a 16-year-old boy actually came out saying that James groomed him and pressured him to send nudes knowing that he was underage, you know? And then other boys have come forward again saying that James forcibly asked these boys to send nudes. So I believe one of the boys did come forward and say that he lied about his age. Granted, you can't argue with that one. However, there's multiple others. It's hit and miss because I do feel like people do hop on the bandwagon when it comes to celebrities, because I think people don't appreciate that celebrities are actual people. And this led to James's account temporarily being demonetized and then losing like brand deals. So at this point, I think, okay, well, like this is pretty career breaking, you know, this is pretty groundbreaking, and not like positive groundbreaking, like done out groundbreaking. I'm thinking, okay, cool. Take this from the perspective of someone who doesn't actively follow what he does, right? Like I just don't. But then when I look back, and I look at the position he's in now, because I hadn't heard of him for a while. And then I saw him on the Not My Bag podcast, right? And I thought, oh, okay, he's still around. And I checked, his channel was only demonetized for a short period of time, but his influence and legacy has contributed to his survival. His massive platform and apology culture are still profitable to brands. Even like marginalized people, they can be shielded if they generate money and attention and value to the industry. And to the algorithm. Whiteness has contributed to James Charles's survival. Whiteness interacts with youth and wealth and femininity. These are all features which are extremely marketable, and they produce forgiveness. I don't know if the same luxury would be awarded to a black gay makeup content creator. I don't think it would land the same way. I think James Charles, his influence is undeniable. His influence is extremely impressive, and that can't be ignored. But like, I don't think he would be in the stable position he is in today if he wasn't white. His behavior is seen as unperceived as confused and not really dangerous, just seen as like lost. I don't think this would be awarded to black gay men. His apologies are seen as remorseful and forgivable, but I don't think it'd be the case if he wasn't white. I think they'd be seen as manipulative, So yeah, I do think that James Charles I think his survival and the longevity of his career has been very dependent on being white. Okay, so now I want to move on a little bit and then talk about like black celebrities. So the first person I want to talk about is Kanye West. Now, Kanye West has said some really awful stuff, some really, really awful stuff. He is one of the most influential rappers of all time, especially in he is one of the most influential rappers of all time. Kanye is very talented, undeniably. We can't ignore that. But the thing is though, Kanye has always been known for like his outspoken opinions, and I don't think there's any issue with that. I'm so like for someone who's a bit outspoken, but there's levels. There really are levels. And like, I think for a long time, the stuff he said, everyone was a bit like, oh, okay. But like, it's only really gotten really, really bad in the last like 5 years. People say and claim that he does a lot of stuff for publicity, which I don't know, because I feel like publicity should only be, I feel like the reason for doing stuff like that and being outspoken is only really necessary if your art isn't that good. But then Kanye does make good music. Granted, I don't think he's made like a really good body of work since Donda, or even really Life of Pablo, to be honest, which is quite a long time really. But he has enough substance and a big enough impressive catalogue that he's good. He's chilling, it's not necessary. Obviously, he is diagnosed with bipolar, but like that can only go so far. Do you know what I mean? Like, obviously, like as someone who has like a lot of problems and has friends that have a lot of mental problems, I do appreciate and acknowledge it. But like, at what point do we stop using it as an excuse? He's made some really awful comments about abortion, about how slavery was a choice. And these were all really awful, right? But I think the one comment that really like hit the mark and everyone was like, nah, this is too much, is the anti-Semitic comments. But apparently I was reading something and it said how Kanye has apparently always been like this. Like running back to the early 2000s, Kanye would make comments like that, which is quite sad, to be honest. I'm just like, oh, really, Kanye? Really, Kanye? But yeah, I think the comments he made, which were anti-Semitic in 2022, were the ones that really led to consequences. He lost his deals with Vogue, Adidas, Gap, Universal. And I think also creating an alliance with Trump really didn't help. That really was the final like nail in the coffin, And he praised Hitler and he identified it as a Nazi. So like, it does get to a point where like, maybe the culture would affect him more as someone who is black, but like you actually like don't help yourself. Do you know what I mean? Like this is like self-destructive. I haven't seen Kanye do or say anything for like a while, but apparently allegedly in May last year, he claimed that his anti-Semitic opinions were due to his bipolar. And I guess this also brings up the questioning and the debate, can or should we use mental disorders and mental health as an excuse, especially when you've had the diagnosis for a long time. I don't know. I don't know what the right or wrong comment is, you know? But then, like I said before, like he hasn't had well-received music really since Donda. He continues to be regarded as a legend. He has a strong fan base. Kanye, he always will, inevitably, because he has been around for so long. But I think his positioning in a mainstream scale has been cut. And it makes me think, would other artists who have been as controversial be able to succeed? Do you know one person? I haven't actually done research on this person, so I actually can't talk about that much. Do you know one person who I don't understand hasn't been cancelled for the way that he moves? Is Matty Healy. Matty Healy has said some extremely awful comments and done some really weird things with like really young fans. It's when he like asks them for like their IDs on stage, but like 1975, they're thriving. They're doing so well, you know. And it just makes me think. Obviously, like I'm not advocating for anything that Kanye has said. Kanye has said some awful things, and consequences definitely need to be put in place. But I'm just thinking, like, where's the distinction? Race. That's the distinction. So, I want to talk about Nicki Minaj. Again, extremely talented, one of the most influential rappers of the. Even though I love Lauryn Hill so much, probably the person to put female rap in a position which it was never in before, you know, a real cultural shifter, a real trailblazer. And I liked her music. I don't particularly like her as a person, but I do appreciate what she has contributed to the culture. Again, it's about being able to distinguish and to recognize, even if you don't really rate someone, you can rate what they've done. And I really rate what she's done. So she's faced a lot of backlash throughout the entirety of her career. But I think the thing that is an issue is, which I will go on to, is that she's always been a real heavy advocate and ally for the LGBTQ plus community. So obviously she's had backlash for defending alleged abusers, that being her husband, that being her brother. That was one that just, it didn't land. But again, it was temporarily, you know, it gets ignored. It gets subtly mentioned, but not enough to have a knock-on effect. She then made the comments about being anti-vax, which obviously was like just completely unnecessary. And I actually don't have an issue with someone being anti-vax, just don't vocalize it. When you are of that much power and that much fame and that much influence, people are going to pick up on what you say. People are going to pick up on what you say. Like, there's a time and a place. It's actually okay to keep your mouth quiet. It's actually okay, babe. You know? Barbs are very loyal. I think Barbs are one of the most loyal, as someone who loves pop culture and breathes it, I think Barbs are one of the most loyal fandoms out there. But I think even they couldn't stand by the way that she was moving in 2025. So Nicki Minaj recently made headlines for embracing conservative and pro-Trump alliances. You know, a shift which obviously shocked many fans because she has been very vocal about being anti-Trump, because Trump has obviously had a lot of laws which intentionally make lives, particularly for trans people, more difficult, and for immigrants. Nicki Minaj has had a big trans fan base and is also an immigrant herself. She's an illegal immigrant. She moved here from Trinidad at 5 years old illegally, you know. So you'd like to think the sympathy levels would be a bit higher, but quite clearly not. So she recently appeared at USA's Turning Point, where she sat down and did an interview with Erica Kirk. Erica Kirk is the wife of the recent politician Charlie Kirk, who was obviously killed at that event earlier on in 2025. And she spoke about how she thought Trump was handsome and dashing, and same for the vice president, and said how they were good role models for young men. And I'm thinking, what has Trump got on you? Genuinely, what has Trump got on you? But I'm sure we'll find out sooner than later. But I think the thing that really obviously pushed people up the wrong way, understandably, is when she made remarks which can be regarded, they were regarded as anti-trans or like very dismissive of trans rights. And obviously for me, that's someone who I will not entertain ever again. I love her music. I love what she's done for the culture. But nah. you need to go, babe. But her comments were really, they were obviously, she has so much influence. They were really highly received and they were really widely recognized as being transphobic comments, which reached the attention of a lot of LGBTQ plus activists. She's been viewed now as harmful and dismissive and quite naive about trans experiences, right? And I think it makes the comments were bad enough, right? The comments were horrific. But I think the fact that she's there to advocate for Trump, and because Trump has been so highly recognized as someone who is adding the fuel to the fire to make the lives for trans people so much more difficult, it was a loss to me. It was a loss to me. I thought Nicki Minaj, nah. Barbs is so loyal, but I think even many members of this community, they were shocked, right? Because the shift to betrayal, like Nicki Minaj would not have the career she has without queer people. Queer people are the reason why Nicki Minaj is so successful, Her recent comments regarding trans people and trans lives have costly consequences, It's ruined her career. And well deserved. She would not be in the position she is in now without trans people and queer people. It wouldn't happen, And I just think you're very conscious and you're very aware of the primary substance of your audience, of your demographic, and yet you continue to go onto such a wide public platform, full well knowing that these people who have supported you and have made you the person you is, these people that have accumulated to your wealth, and you're still going to badmouth them. I feel like it gets to a point where people like Nicki Minaj do deserve severe consequences and do deserve withdrawals, do deserve less recognition. It gets to a point where you just can't subscribe anymore, and that's where I'm at. But there's obviously she received a heavy level of criticism. I do think we need to be obviously very considerate of people's mental health and all of that. But then with that being said, was she being considerate of trans people's mental health when she made the comments? I don't think so. But this led to her deactivating her Instagram, which obviously that can lead to a loss of income for brands, deals, etc. There's even been online petitions to get her deported. I need to read this from my book because I can't remember how it was worded. But obviously this is not a legal process, but a cultural expression of outrage. These are digitally symbolic rather than policy actions, But she'd be nowhere without her fan base, without her queer community. She'd be screwed. Again, Nicki Minaj does deserve to be cancelled. She deserves to face the scrutiny that she's currently receiving. I'm not denying that. But again, there have been white people who have made transphobic comments and they are still thriving. I think this is actually one of the most severe cases where I think this actually might affect her. I feel like cancel culture is very temporarily for so many people, but I do genuinely think that this might really be the nail in the coffin. But we can reassess. I don't know. Maybe there'll be a redemption era. I don't know. Okay, so the final person I want to talk about is Chris Brown. Chris Brown, right, is probably the OG example of cancel culture. Chris Brown is cited as proof that cancel culture maybe doesn't work. Chris Brown has committed documented violence, been very violent throughout his entire career, and continues to show aggression in multiple occasions repeatedly for over a decade. Chris Brown was on bail last year in the UK after hitting. I can't remember who did Chris Brown hurt. I can't remember who he hurt, hurting someone and then fleeing the UK. It's a real luxury, and I guess wealth also contributes to it as well. You also could ignore the race and be maybe wealth can help cancel culture, because obviously not every celebrity is wealthy. If cancel culture was consistent, race did have a bigger part to play in it, Chris Brown would be cancelled. As a black man, he should have harsher consequences. He should have industry rejection, and he should have permanent culture exile. But instead, Chris Brown has continued to have extreme success. He goes on these massive tours. He bags massive collaborations. He has chart success. He's protected from the industry. He has a loyal fan base, and he has ongoing platforms to capital off. I think this could also show though that cancel culture may be more effective towards women or people without protection. Chris Brown probably creates a lot of money for a lot of people. And I think people see it like that. And that's why maybe he's able to be in the position he's in, you know? It almost feels like cancel culture is less effective when the perpetrator isn't male and the harm is against women. You know, when the industry or when like the industry is financially invested, you know, you can argue that Chris Brown wasn't really spared because of race. You know, Chris Brown wasn't not cancelled because of race. Chris Brown was spared because violence against women is culturally survivable. You know, violence against women, it unfortunately isn't enough to kill this man's career, to end this man's career. You know, I think things that need to be considered is how profitable someone is, how replaceable someone is, who their audience is, and how sympathetic the media frames them. You know, I think, again, Chris Brown makes a lot of money for a lot of people. So I feel like the idea of him being cancelled just isn't applicable, unfortunately. I feel like white privilege often softens cancel culture. White privilege often softens consequences, but it's not the only shield, you know? I think wealth, fan loyalty, gender norms, and cultural capital all have massive contributions as to whether or not you can be cancelled. I think it has to be considered like, what can you provide for external people, you know? Sydney Sweeney is obviously a pure example of someone that makes a lot of money. Same for James Charles, same for Nicki Minaj, same for Kanye West. I think you lose Nicki out of this equation because of her fan base have obviously like gone against her opinions, right? Chris Brown, for some odd reason, seems to still thrive. Sydney Sweeney and James, I think that whiteness does definitely contribute to it. And Kanye West, I think the biggest thing with Kanye West is Kanye West obviously lost his brand endorsements. You know, being anti-Semitic obviously doesn't land very well, as it shouldn't. I believe his like net worth decreased enormously after losing a $400 million deal with Adidas after his comments. So, you know, there's definitely a lot of contributions, a lot of reasonings as to why or why not people will be cancelled. But I think it's really important to remember and appreciate cancel culture is so subjective, right? So subjective, so skeptical. There's different ways to look at it. That's that really. That's just my take, my examples and what I think. And yeah, that's the chit chat done. Guys, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please like, share, comment and subscribe. My name is Jord and I look forward to seeing you again soon.